Y a continuación cedo la palabra al embajador y representante permanente del Líbano.
Thank you, Mr. President. Many have stressed today that 2015 has proved to be a momentous year on the global development agenda, with the adoption of the 2030 One for Sustainable Development, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Financing for Development, and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. In Agenda 2030, world leaders adopted a comprehensive, ambitious, and a people and planet-centered set of universal and transformative sustainable development goals and targets, in addition to a political declaration that identified numerous challenges facing our world today in the quest to strengthen universal peace, larger freedom, and greater justice. The agenda provides governments, particularly in the developing world, with a global framework that integrates the economic, social, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development, based on which they can identify their own national priorities and goals for the next 15 years. This will require a strengthened role by the UN Nations Development System and a reinvigoration of its functions to support developing countries in achieving their sustainable development goals and in creating an enabling environment at the national, regional, and global levels for a successful implementation and follow-up of the agenda. In this context, my delegation would like to stress on the following few points. First, poverty eradication in its multiple dimensions remains the biggest global challenge and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development in developing countries. The funds, programs, and specialized agencies of the UNDS should enhance their efforts to integrate poverty eradication as the highest priority into their strategic plans and regularly report back to ECOSOC on the steps they have taken to address the root causes of poverty. Second, the nature and quality of funding that the UNDS received affect the functioning of its programs, agencies, and funds. In this regard, we note with concern the growing imbalance between core and non-core funding for operational activities for development, which leads to an increase in transaction costs, fragmentation, competition, and overlap among UN entities, and which restricts their ability to align their function and strategies with the national priorities and plans of program countries, an indispensable necessity for a successful implementation of Agenda 2030. While recognizing the difficulty that the UNDS is facing in mobilizing a larger share for core resources, more efforts should be exerted to convince donors, including non-state actors, of the necessity to participate in pool funding mechanisms and to make their non-core contributions less earmarked and more flexible and predictable. Third, an integrated Agenda 2030 will require UNDS entities to work in a more coordinated and coherent manner with the ultimate aim of achieving more integration in the currently loose system. At the country level, and it is our view that this could be achieved through a more coherent and integrated UN development assistance framework, closely aligned with national plans and strategies, supplemented by better and more regular reporting by the UN entities to governments on the progress achieved in UNDF implementation, an enhanced and more diversified resident coordinator system, and finally continued progress in the adoption of the results-based management by UN entities, complemented by developing the statistical capacities of the program countries. Fourth, today we live in a world that is increasingly blighted by humanitarian crises, traversing the borders of countries and continents, triggered by natural disasters and protracted conflicts that have left tens of millions of people forcibly displaced in their own countries and beyond. This places immense social, demographic, environmental, and economic pressures on host communities, exacerbating vulnerabilities, overstretching limited resources and basic social services, aggravating unemployment, and affecting stability and security. There is an urgent requirement for more cooperation among the different entities of the UN system to address such complex situation in a coherent, comprehensive, and appropriate manner that combines the development and humanitarian pillars of the UNDS system. Such an approach should move beyond the sphere of relief to development, as presented in the QC PR of 2012, towards that of relief and development. Finally, in Lebanon, there have been some encouraging first attempts in that direction to deal with the adverse impact of the presence of more than 1.2 million refugees as a result of the crisis in Syria. The Lebanese government, in cooperation with UN agencies and programs and other national and international partners, has developed in the past couple of years a comprehensive Lebanon crisis response plan, which aims at integrating the humanitarian and stabilization responses to the refugee crisis through the provision of humanitarian assistance to refugees and investing in services, economies, and institutions reaching to the most vulnerable of host communities. Needless to say, the success of the LCRP will also depend to a high extent on the timely, comprehensive, and appropriate provision of funds by international partners to finance the plan effectively and efficiently. Thank you.
Agradezco al distinguido representante del Líbano y a continuación doy la palabra al distinguido